Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture 43 of week 9 and the title of today's lecture is Multilingualism and Varieties of Language. So, we did talk about multilingualism in the last class if you remember. So, we will be talking about it again. So, we did talk about it in terms of social context if you remember, and we will be talking about something called different varieties of language as well. So, these are the topics that we are planning to cover today. Why do we have bilingualism and multilingualism? We are familiar with these terms generally, even if you are not very familiar with the technical terms, but why do we have them? What are the reasons behind the creation of these two terms? Then we will be talking about different types of bilinguals. Then we will be talking about the ideas of vernacular and standard, which are probably new ideas for you. Then I will introduce you to this idea of lingua franca, and finally, we will be talking about the notions of pidgin and creole. So, we have been talking about choice of language from the last class. We were saying that when we discuss sociolinguistics, the first question that we discuss is the choice of language. When we talk about language use, we say that we select something from our knowledge of language, we basically choose to use a particular form in a context. So, we are coming back to the choice part here, and we are saying that speakers of different languages come into contact. So, we did talk about it in the last class. We said that if different speech communities are staying together in a close proximity, they will take linguistic items from each other. We also discussed some examples if you remember. So, keeping in mind the choice questions and the language contact questions, we are trying to talk about certain factors which are responsible for both bilingualism and multilingualism. Certain factors are political factors. So, we did talk about colonization because colonialism gave birth to different languages. When people migrate from one place to another, they had to learn a different language for resettlement. So, colonization and resettlement are two terms which are useful for us at this point when we are discussing political factors responsible for bilingualism or multilingualism. So, here we are also talking about military invasion, and a population has to learn the invader's language. So, now I am asking you to pay attention to the first bullet point, where I am saying that speakers not only choose, but they are also forced to use different languages. So, we were talking about choice from the last class, but in today's class we are also talking about some kind of forced use. So, for military invasion, for example, you can say that a population is forced to learn the invader's language, which will also give birth to bilingualism or multilingualism. So, there is already one language with the speakers, but they learn another one due to this invasion. Natural disasters are also responsible for mass migration, and we already discussed that migration results in language maintenance or shift that we discussed in the last class. So, now you can say that mass migration results in bilingualism or multilingualism. I hope you are getting the point. Along with that, we can say that religion can actually help someone to learn a new language. You can think about languages like Hebrew or Sanskrit, which are majorly learned for religious purposes. Then we will come to the cultural factors. If you think about the minority ethnic groups may maintain their language and culture. So, in the last class we talked about it. Minority ethnic groups at times maintain their language and culture, and at time they are shifting to the language of the majority group. Economy is another factor which can actually help us to understand the nature of bilingualism or multilingualism. So, if a community or a group decides to migrate to a different place for improving the standard of living, it is possible that they have to learn a new language, the place where they are migrating. So, it gives birth to bilingualism or multilingualism. Education is an important factor because we know that we are actually accessing different language for education like English. All of us are talking to English because we are actually using an educational platform. So, apart from English, you can also learn languages like Japanese or German, which are majorly used for the purpose of education. You can also think about other languages in Indian context, of course. Technology is another factor for the creation of bilingualism or multilingualism. So, the use of English is very much common for non-native speakers for technological purpose. So, most of us use English for the purpose of technology, but nowadays you can also say that we are using other languages, for example, a number of Indian languages for technological purpose, but mostly we use English. So, technology is actually contributing to the creation of a huge number of bilinguals or multilinguals. So, at this point I will ask you to pay attention to the following points: the age of acquisition. So, by now you know what acquisition is, we discussed it in the beginning part of the course, right. So, we have to consider whether the age of acquisition is same for the bilinguals or multilinguals, or they have acquired languages, different languages at different points of time. Fluency is another factor. A person may or may not have similar fluency in the languages that they know, and also the domains of use may vary. So, we discussed about the different domains of use previously, I hope you remembered them. And we also talk about attitude. We have learned that negative attitude actually results in language shift and positive attitude results in language maintenance. So, you can say that if there is a positive attitude, one person can maintain the his or her own language, along with that they can use the other languages. Now, I will tell you about the different types of bilinguals. Please note that this is not an exhaustive list because there are more types. You can actually add more types of bilingualisms in the list. So, I have listed only a few which are important for now. So, the first one is additive bilingual. What does it mean? So, you can say that two languages are complementary. So, both of them, I mean, if we think about bilinguals, we will say that both the languages are used in a complementary manner. Balanced bilingual, you can say that a mastery of two languages are roughly similar, they are not identical, but they are more or less similar. Then we can talk about compound bilinguals, where two languages are learnt at the same time. So, you can think about children who listen to two different languages from their parents. So, for them compound bilingualism is quite common, they are learning both the languages at the same time. We can also talk about coordinate bilinguals, where two languages are learnt in separate contexts. For example, you can say one language is learnt at home and the other is acquired at school for children. So, please pay attention that when I am using learning here, I am not discarding the idea of acquisition, I am using it as a cover term. Dominant bilinguals will have better fluency in one language and lesser fluency in the other language or languages, if we are talking about multilinguals. So, we are definitely talking about bilinguals here as the heading says, but you can of course apply them for multilinguals. So, we are using bilingualism and multilingualism together. Then let us talk about something called early bilinguals, where a person acquires 2 languages in childhood, and subtractive bilingual, where second language is acquired at the expense of aptitudes already acquired for first language. So, the aptitudes of first language will help the person to learn the second language. So, we already learnt a few things which you can directly relate to the ideas of both bilingualism and multilingualism. I hope you also remembered the ideas of Fishman that we discussed in the last class. So, following Fishman, I am talking about 2 ideas now. You are already familiar with one idea, it is a repetition for you, and the second one is new for you. So, we can have bilingualism with or without diglossia. So, diglossia is something that we discussed in the last class. One language can have different varieties, a high and a low variety. So, here we are saying that we can have bilingualism with or without diglossia, and diglossia with and without bilingualism. So, this is very important for you to remember, because if you happen to analyze some diglossic situation, you need to comment on the bilingual background as well. And we use this term who speaks what language to whom and when. You did not know that this is actually mentioned by Fishman. So, at this point I am telling you it is related to language choice, but we are coming back to this idea because it will be useful for us again. So, remember we the kind of scales that we discussed. So, the scales are directly useful for us to understand language choice, and language choice, as I told you, is always helpful whenever we are doing things in sociolinguistics. So, I am again talking about the idea of code mixing. We did say that code mixing has some patterns, and we did not discuss it in detail, but I told you that code mixing does have some particular patterns which will be based on some constraints. And I also asked you to do some exercise for yourself, where you can actually collect some codes around you, mix codes around you, and try to understand the constraints. So, code mixing takes place to assert some group identity, and we are also saying that negotiations are done through the mixing. So, when you are mixing a code, you are basically negotiating something. You have different identities as speakers of different languages, but you are there is a negotiation process going on whenever you are mixing codes. So, today we will be asking a question which is important for us: how do sociolinguists categorize languages? So, this is the discussion that we are beginning from today, and we will not end here. So, even in the next 1 or 2 lectures we will continue with this discussion. So, how do we categorize languages? And here we are talking about sociolinguistics. So, our parameters will be something where the social factors will be coming in the scenario. We said that status and social functions are important. Remember the scale where we talked about high status and low status. So, we will be talking about the idea of vernacular and standard languages. I will tell you the basic idea of standard languages today, and we will continue the discussion in the next class. Then I will talk about something called lingua franca. If you are already familiar with this term, what is lingua franca? It is a kind of link language. So, we will learn about it, and finally, I will be talking about something called pidgin and something called creole. So, the term vernaculars is popularly used, but at times we do not pay attention to its actual meaning. What does it mean? It refers to languages which have not been standardized. So, we do not know what is standardized. So, I have put them in quote. So, for now let us know that there is something called standard, we will talk about it later. So, vernaculars are not standardized and they do not have any official status. So, usually it is the first language learned by people of a community, used for relatedly narrow range of informal functions. So, we do not use them for formal settings, we use them for informal settings, and we do not use them everywhere, but we learn them as the first language. So, after getting the differences between different varieties of language sociolinguistically, you can say that there are certain overlaps between terms, and you yourself will be able to identify them. So, UNESCO in 1951 defined vernacular in the following way: a vernacular is the first language of a group socially or politically dominated by a group with a different language. So, when we are saying that it is a first language, but it has relatively narrow range of informal functions. So, we are definitely saying that there is some other language which is the major language for the speakers. So, what is that? The language which is basically used by a socially or politically dominant group. So, this is something that we have to keep in mind. And we can also say that vernaculars are colloquial languages which are used for everyday interaction. So, the term colloquial is often borrowed to describe or talk about a number of languages in Indian context. So, these are something like the vernacular. So, what is a standard language? A linguistic variety which has gone through a codification process. So, what is this codification process? We will be discussing it in detail later, but for now let us just know this much, that it is a variety which has gone through a codification. So, what is codification? You are basically compiling the codes somewhere, preserving them, and this is something that we are referring to as codification process, and later we will see that there are more layers to it, but this is recognized as a prestigious variety or code. So, why are we why there is a need to preserve the codes of a particular variety? Because it is recognized as a prestigious variety in the society, while the other varieties are not recognized as prestigious varieties. So, codification is done through dictionaries, grammars, etc., and we will be talking about it again. So, if you think about the idea of diglossia that we have already discussed, you can say that this particular variety, the standard variety, will have a function of a high variety in terms of a diglossia, not the low variety. We are coming to the definition of lingua franca now. As I told you briefly, it is basically a link language. So, we also alternately use the term link language instead of saying lingua franca. What is a lingua franca? It is a language for communication between people. So, why do you need communication between people? So, you can of course say that in a multilingual society, people speak 2 or 3 different languages, but it is not the same everywhere. There are more complex situations where people do not understand each other's language, or there is a need of a common language which is used for several purposes like economic issues, like transaction in markets, etc. So, that is why we need something called a link language or a lingua franca, where members of different speech communities can interact with each other. So, in a multilingual community, it serves the purpose of communication for people who speak different languages. So, you can think about examples of lingua franca. I will also ask you to think about examples of lingua franca in Indian context. You can have different examples in your mind. You can think about examples in your area. You can think about examples which are not from your area, but you are familiar with the idea of a common language. So, we have to remember that this is a common language across different communities. So, pidgins and creoles are important lingua franca. This is, we do not know what pidgins and creoles are. So, we will be learning about them soon, and we will see that these are important, and these develop initially as trade languages, as we will see later. So, what is a pidgin? Some of you are already familiar with this term. A pidgin is a language which has no native speakers. What does it mean? It means that they are means of communication for people who do not have a common language. We have been talking exactly about this notion, that there are people who speak different languages, who do not understand each other, but there is a need to communicate, for example, for the purpose of trade. So, they have to communicate to each other. So, they create a language. This language is known as pidgin, which is a common language. So, we do get pidgins in multilingual sea coasts. There are now maps of pidgin languages available as well. So, if you happen to see them, you can notice that there are multilingual sea coasts, and pidgin developed as trade languages, as I have already mentioned. It is said that pidgins have limited functions, they are used for trading purposes, and it is also said that structures of pidgin have components from different languages. So, there is a debate regarding this issue. Earlier it was considered that pidgins will take the structure from one language and vocabulary from another language, and it is a structurally simplified form, but now people are opposing this view. They are saying that no, these are complex enough, we should not say that these are structurally simplified, and the components that are taken from different languages, it is not the case that the structure will be taken from language A and vocabulary will be taken from language B. So, we can say something like a lexifier language technically. So, it's not like that, it's more complex, and we need to understand the complexity. But this is true that pidgins always have low prestige and they are associated with negative attitudes. This is basically a language created for the sake of communication between different communities, but it will be associated with a negative attitude always. Pidgins are acquired by children if it is widely spoken in an area, then we term it as a creole. Children use them as first language in different domains, and at times creoles become quite popular, and at times they gain prestige as well. So, pidgins become structurally regular with the process of creolization, which is the general idea about creoles. So, you can see some data from Talk Pidgin, and if I ask you to go through it, everything is related to you will go. We can see a transition, we can see a change. Remember, we talked about language change, and we said that we will be coming back to the idea of change again and again in sociolinguistics. So, if you consider these constructions, you can see that the structures are changing. So, there are factors related to it, we are not talking about the factors, we are just looking at the example sentences, and we can see that there is a change in the pidgin. At this point, I will be introducing you to the works done by Mufwene, who talked about the role of lexifier and substrate languages. What is a substrate language? You have this skeleton of the grammar of one language, which is known as substrate language. So, we basically talk about the language which is helping in the creation of the pidgin. And Mufwene also challenged the idea that pidgins are created before the creation of creoles. So, it can be, the complexities can be actually starting from the very beginning point, which is for the linked languages, and he is saying that we cannot say that pidgins are created before the creation of creoles always. And there is also a common misconception about pidgin, that we say that pidgins are broken language. So, which is another result of applying negative attitude towards it. So, pidgins did not start as broken language. This is something which is also claimed by him, and languages in contact can be altered and recombined to create a new system. This is something that we are highlighting. When you are using the term recombined, you have to pay attention to the fact that we are talking about features. So, the different features can be reflecting in different ways, manifesting in different ways in the structure of the linked languages. So, it is difficult to understand the genesis of hybrid languages, and I am using the term hybrid languages carefully as a cover term. So, hybrid languages are not creoles. Creoles are something which are created for the purpose of trade and migration only, or you can say pidgins, but hybrid languages are any kind of language mixture which can be created as different communities coexist with each other for a long time. So, it is important for us to understand the difference. I am also talking about the work by Peter Oyer, who said that bilingual practices can be grammaticalized. What do we mean by grammaticalize? You remember the lessons in both morphology and syntax. We did talk about something where we talked about grammatical category, and there is also a term called grammaticalization, which we did not discuss, but some of you know. So, basically we are talking about creation of a new system, and it is a new system altogether, which is not a copy of either language A or language B, which interacted and resulted in the creation of a new linked language. So, we are talking about language mixing, which plays an important role in the formation of different linguistic varieties, and it is complex. We cannot say that this is simple and this is broken and it is not good and they do not, these languages are bad, etc. So, but we should say that the data is quite complex if we happen to work on any pidgin, creole or hybrid languages. So, you when I asked you to think about examples in Indian context, you can say that Nagamese, which is spoken in the northeastern part of India. If you are from northeast, then you of course know about the language or speak it. So, Berling 2007 did an extensive work on Nagamese. So, Nagamese is a lingua franca. Now, my point is, can we call it a creole? So, it is basically different communities who are creating a language together, but there is a doubt whether we can actually refer to as a creole or not. And we also need to understand that creoles are not the same everywhere. So, if you think about something where there is a continuum, so Berling talks about the idea of a cycle. So, there are different gradients in the continuum, it is not the same everywhere. So, the linked languages will change at different points, and we need to understand the structure and social factors both associated with the mixing. If you happen to study only the structure, or if you study the social factors for creation of these mixed languages, nothing is complete, it will not complete the story. We need both, we need some understanding of the structure, and we also need some ideas or analysis of the social factors which compel the languages to mix. So, coming to the conclusion part of the lecture, today we talked about the idea of choice again, language choice, but we also said that it is not only choice, but at times speakers are forced to use different languages, and vernaculars are the first languages which are used informally. Standard languages are languages that are created by a process called codification, and lingua franca is the language for communication for different communities, and we talked about pidgins, which are trade languages. The traditional positions regarding pidgin have been challenged. So, I hope you learned some new ideas related to bilingualism or multilingualism. So, we will continue the discussion in the next class. I hope you will enjoy this. Thank you. These are the key references.